Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Can everyone on Zoom hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, all right, good deal. And if we could make sure that we keep our microphones muted, and also mute your phones for those of you that are here in person, we would really appreciate that so it's not disruptive during our meetings. Had a couple of people say something about that, so just passing on the word. We do have some free plants over there on the table. Shirley Provence, who's one of our master gardeners, brought those in. So first come, first serve. You can grab a plant. Don't fight over them too bad. So. Okay. And those aloes, you may be able to even divide them up a little bit more if somebody wanted a piece.
Divided, so they need no kids don't.
No.
Our pot is,
Okay.
is overflowing. We had school.
Okay.
Oh God. I'm giving away so much aloe, it's not even funny.
Okay, well, again, I'm hoping to get you all out a little bit early tonight. I know this is another session on soils, but it's a little different because we're going to be talking about soil management in residential landscapes. And so the soils that we deal with in an urban environment is a lot different than what Hebron spoke to us about, you know, with just soils, row crops, and things like that. So the soil changes drastically when you think of an urban environment, a new subdivision, a downtown area, all those things. And so our plants have to go through a lot more stress when they're in an urban environment. So we're going to talk about a few of the things that you might see or learn about the soil itself. So again, how does soil feel? What's the role of soil in plants? They provide physical support. It holds that water so that you can have, when the plant uptakes the water, holds nutrients for the plants to uptake, maintains air near the roots for respiration. It also breaks down to reduce or release plant nutrients, and it also is part of that nutrient cycling. So today we want to look at understanding the soil functions that can be indicators of soil quality, become familiar with soil attributes that can be improved with organic matter, contrast methods of adding organic matter or altering soil attributes, explain how to take a soil sample. We'll go through that quickly because you guys, we beat that one to death, I think. Be aware of different types of fertilizer materials and the benefits and the limitations of those materials, and then talk about some of the common soil organisms and what supports them and why we want to reduce our pesticide inputs, reduce our fertilizer inputs, because it does have an impact on the natural soil organisms. So we're going to look at the overall soil quality, look at the physical, chemical, and biological properties of soil. So basically, what is soil quality? When you look at a good soil, what are some things that you look for? Okay. You want it to support that biological diversity. You want it to have worms. You want it to have fungi. You want it to have bacteria, roly-polies, the good bacteria, good fungi. They're both good and bad going to be there, but you want all of those things because they work in that decomposition process. It helps to regulate the flow of water. If your soil is really loose or you leave it bare, especially during this time of year, we're kind of ending our garden season and we're going into winter time, and soon hopefully we will get some fall rains. Hopefully. But you don't want your soil to be bare, because when we do get those rainfalls, then it's going to wash away and then you have erosion problems and you're left with the subsoil. So we want to manage that flow of water. We want it to serve as a filter, because whatever you put into the soil filters down through and it goes into our groundwater, it goes into your creeks, it goes into your rivers, and that's where we get our drinking water from. So there's a lot of contaminants that can get into the soil. But it serves both as a reservoir and a cycling area for those nutrients. But its main function, I guess, is to provide support and physical stability for the plants, animals, and structures. So when we look at what would be a good soil, some quality indicators, when we look at, well, I don't know. There we go. Okay. So we want a good water holding capacity, bulk density, earthworms present, water infiltration, organic matter, soil structure. Okay, all of those things are important when you talk about the biological diversity, the water and solution flows, the filtering, buffering, and degradation, nitrogen, carbon cycling and storage, and then the stability and the source of physical support of the soil. So everything has a job to do to make up what we would consider a good soil. So our organic matter, I probably should just cover up the screen and let you all answer this. Here we go, I could do that. Okay, so what are some good things about adding organic matter to your soil?
Loosen it up if it got a lot of clay matter
Okay,
in it, and begin to break that up a little bit.
okay, it helps to break up that clay soil. Nutrients, okay, it helps with the nutrient holding capacity. Water holding capacity, okay.
Composting stuff, materials.
Composting. What's that compost do to the soil?
I think it just helps to kind of stir it up, mix it up, adds
Stir
a
it up,
little
mix
bit
it
more,
up. Mhm.
add some nutrients.
So it builds up the soil, looking for a particular word here.
Oh,
Starts with an S.
Soil structure.
Soil structure, okay. So your organic
Okay.
matter is building up that soil structure and working with what you've got. Because you can't get rid of the soil you've got, you're stuck with it, sorry. But you can improve upon what you've got. So we mentioned most of these things, increasing the soil biological activity, biodiversity, and cycling too would be a couple more things. So our soil structure and water, when you look at our soil particles, you have angular and subangular blocky like pieces in the soil, okay? Now that makes up the components of your soil, and that can be very fine to very coarse, okay? You may have medium, fine, they're very fine, but that's going to impact the aeration, you know, how much oxygen is flowing through the soil, because our roots need oxygen as well as water. It's going to affect the infiltration or the runoff rate, the water movement in general, the water holding capacity, and the overall soil biology. So you have to look at the structure. So when you look at these pictures, which one looks like the best soil to you? We'll just do 1, 2, and 3. One. Okay. Okay, so number 1 looks like the best to me also. The third one over there, do you see any roots coming out of that? What else would be bad about that soil?
A little bit of that clover on top. Solid.
Okay, it's very compacted. You can see a little bit of clover struggling. You see any roots coming out the bottom part? No, so that's where your compaction is. So it's going to be very shallow rooted. So what's going to happen during a drought? Okay, they're going to dry out very quickly. Okay, and we also see, you know, with our clay soils, they start to crack and break open. You know, we are still in a severe drought situation right now. I mean, we need some rain bad. As this is one of the most important times of year for trees. Even though they're going into dormancy, they're going through photosynthesis, and they need to be making those sugars and making those energy, you know, making that energy as much as possible to store down in the root system so they can rest all winter and then come out with a big bang, in the spring. So if that gets depleted at this time of the year, and then the tree, goes through winter, maybe it comes out early, how our weather does, it fluctuates up and down, up and down. And so if that tree leaves out March, and then we get a hard freeze, kills all the leaves, that tree has to go back and try to find more reserves, more energy to put back a second set of leaves. And so that tree starts out its whole year behind or in decline. And when that happens year after year, especially in our large trees, that's when you see them start to die back, okay? Because they're not getting the water that they need, so the root systems are dying off. So it all kind of goes together if you think about it. What happens this fall is going to affect the spring and next summer, and it's all year round. It's not just one thing that's going to be killing your plants. It's several things that could be going on. So in practice, I think this first picture, they've got some good topsoil, probably in maybe an old farm field that hasn't really been messed with. It's not in a subdivision. I'd say the third one would probably be subdivision soil, something else that was brought back in, compacted. But this one here, I think you would see in an area where maybe cover cropping was used to put a raw manure crop back into the soil. They're putting the nutrients back into. That's what's going to make that good topsoil. So organic matter is very important. So our healthy soil structure, we look at the infiltration of the water. And so we want the water to infiltrate and go down through the soil. We don't want it to just hit and run off. And so again, that's where our cover crops and our grasses and our other plants come in, where we say don't leave the soil bare. If you have a garden spot, be throwing out some turnip greens, some clover, any kind of cool season seeds that you've got left over, throw them out in your garden now and just let them grow all winter. And that's going to help with the infiltration rate of the rain when we do get it. We want to slow down that rain. We want it to soak in, and we want it to go down into the soil. We don't want it to just run off and then it goes into our storm drain system and it overloads the water of the treatment plant and it all ends up in the river. So there's a lot of things there that go together. Compaction. We see compaction both in urban soils and in our row crops, our traditional agriculture. Both of these are man-created, typically. When you have construction, you have a lot of heavy equipment, and that equipment's going in and out and over while they're building the house, putting the bricks up and all this stuff. So they're constantly compacting the soil, and then they'll bring in some soil, probably from another site, and they dump it back on there and they put some sod out, and they typically put Nandinas, boxwood, let's see, and Hellrye holly. That's usually the three plants that you'll see, and they're all planted about this far from the house. Call them contractor plants, which is not good practices. So we don't want to do that. So you don't, but basically your compaction, you end up with what we call a plow layer. And that's when you're tilling down to the same depth every year, year after year. With farm equipment, they create a plow layer. And at some point, they may have drainage problems and issues and such like that in a farm field, and they may have to rip into that subsoil and break that plow layer up somehow. And so if they're not using good management practices, like putting organic matter on or planting cover crops and tilling those under, then you're just adding to the problem. Okay, so there's ways to avoid the problem. And also one of the things that we see a lot is working the soil when it's wet. That's a big no-no, okay, because it just ruins that structure. You get great big clods. It will crust over, and then you'll see that your garden seeds won't come up because that hard crust develops on top of the soil. So we don't want to work the soil when it's wet at all. So basically we want a porous, kind of loose soil with crumbs and blocks, rather than this kind of tightly packed crumbs with that surface crust. You'll see a few large blocks with cracks, and then you've got the subsoil down there. So on the right is typically what you're looking at in a new subdivision or maybe an urban area where that soil has been removed. This would be maybe more of a natural area that's been amended or just been allowed to have those natural plants live there. Microorganisms are working in the soil. So compacted soil structure just means there's less space between the soil particles. And so, did y'all catch that? I'll go back. See, so instead of this, you got that slow flow, we have a little dribble.
What do you think about
Okay.
aerating machines?
Aerating machines. Okay. There's two different types of aerators. There's a core aerator, and then there is core aerator, and then there's a core plug aerator. Okay, the ones with the spikes, I may be getting the names wrong. The spiked ones, you end up compacting your soil more than you're helping it. The core aeration is a machine that goes, you take it across your lawn, and it actually pulls little plugs out and throws them out on the lawn. And those little holes are open. And so that would be the time to put out some compost or organic matter if you're trying to build up your soil structure. So it is good, but the spiky things, they tend to compact the soil even worse because it's you think about a football field and a bunch of football players. Yeah. Right, right. So yes. Yes. Well, probably not Lowe's or Home Depot. I mean, really, the only one I know of around here is Sunbelt Rentals, and possibly Co-op. Yeah, there's not very many equipment rental places around, but I know Sunbelt and Co-op. Mm-hmm.
It's like 2 holes at a time.
Mm-hmm. If you really want to work out, you could get the manual one. So, but it's not an easy task. I mean, but you can hook it up behind a lawnmower and go do it.
Something that you have to pull behind a little tractor or something.
Yeah, usually they hook up to a tractor or a lawnmower and you just pull it. It would be a PTO run. Yeah. Yeah. Golf courses would be, golf course would have something really huge. For the lawn, it's going to be something that's probably about 2 or 3 foot wide, and you hook to the back of your lawnmower or a tractor, some type of equipment, and just take it across your lawn.
They have a push.
Push one.
And when you can push, it's pretty, it's a workout.
Mhm.
That you can use, and then they have one that's ran.
Mhm. Mhm.
Especially the soil. And we get our neighbors involved, so it ends up, I mean, it's a 10 bucks per person. It's not-
There you go. There you go. It's like the old barn building. Yeah. Well, that's a good idea. It's a good idea. Split it up amongst your neighbors. And
Why is it first and second graders can tell them whoever can get his China crashes?
Yeah.
You know, is that?
yeah, my kids did a lot of, well, my son always liked to dig holes. I do not know why. He always loved to dig holes, but pick up rocks. We'd pay him a penny a rock until he got on to it. It was worth more than a penny a rock. So anyway, you can see the difference between that good soil that had good infiltration, the water was slowing down, going through the particles, but pretty much staying put and then going on into the groundwater system. Well, this very little water is getting down through the soil, so the rest of it is running off. Okay, it's going down the storm drain, it's going into the creeks and the rivers along with the soil that attaches to it as it flows down, and then it just ends up being water pollution in the long run. So what is man's impact on soil? Our impact, one is that removing the topsoil and replacing it with something foreign. You're better off to try to work with what you've got and improve that soil than to remove what you've got and replace it. Okay, you've just got to work with that organic matter and cover crop planting, green manures to build that soil structure back up. We compact the soil all the time, just little things that we do that you don't even think about. I'll go out to look at trees. Okay, I'll get the call. Okay, my tree's dying. You know, it's been here, it's got to be 50, 100 years old, and all of a sudden it's dying and it's dropping limbs. Well, I get out there to look at it, and there'll be cars parked under it. There'll be bricks, there'll be, you know, stacks of wood all over the root zone of the tree. And where did we say that the root zone of the tree is?
That's the top.
Okay, past the crown. How deep?
Not very deep.
Not very deep at all. Okay, so it doesn't take much at all to compact that soil around the tree roots and cause problems to where that tree is going to go into decline. And then we get a drought. Then we get spring freezes, and just boom, 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 one thing after the other. So what we're doing is increasing the erosion by doing these practices. We're reducing the organic matter, and we're increasing our soil pollution, and you have the reduced infiltration, so you have increased runoff or increased erosion. So that's things that we are doing, just practices that we do all the time. Sometimes you don't even think about what you're doing. You're like, oh, I didn't realize I wasn't supposed to, you know, park under that tree continually, or, you know, put a heavy piece of equipment that doesn't run anymore. You know, I'm going to park it under that tree. Well, you know, it's going to sit there for years, and it's eventually going to cause problems with the root zone. So if you think your soil is not ideal, of course, first we're going to soil test. Do you take your soil test just from one spot? No, good answer. About how many spots would you go test for an average lawn or pull samples from? 10? 10's a good number for just an average size lot. If you're going, you've got acres and acres, the soil test likes us to have 10 acres or less per sample. So if you had a large farm, you could break it down into 10-acre increments and take smaller soil samples, and I would draw it out myself and mark the paddocks or mark the areas where I've tested the soil at. Of course, we talked about organic matter additions, the site management, surface cover. Anytime the sun can reach that soil surface, it's going to bring up those seeds that are down there in that seed bank that have been down there forever, and they're going to come up and they're going to live and they're going to thrive. Some things that we can do is amend the soil. Of course, you want to know what your pH is. That is because the pH that is required by the plant that you're wanting to grow. Okay, we talked some about that. Blueberries, azaleas need acid soil, others need alkaline soil. So make sure you know what your plant needs are before you go amending your soil or planting these type of plants. The soil test is going to tell you what nutrients you have. It's going to tell you your pH. And then we could talk about alternatives. What can you do? If you've got really, really bad soil, you may have to go to raised beds, containers, soilless mixes. Just build upwards instead of trying to work with your soil. Yes. How often should you soil test? Okay, we say if you've just moved into a place and it's new to you, soil test right then. And if your soil is really out of whack and maybe it's really acidic and you're having to add a lot of lime, then you're going to test every year until you get that soil to where you want it. You're going to soil test, you're going to amend according to the test. Once you get it where you want it, about once every 3-5 years would be fine. High value crops, like our blueberries, if somebody has an orchard, usually they will test every year, especially on blueberries, because it is such a high value crop and it is so picky about the soil pH that if you've planted in an area where you have naturally alkaline soil, you're always going to be fighting that and trying to make that soil more acidic. So that means staying on top of it with the soil test and doing the amendments every year like is recommended. So
Now, the book seems to be faithful toward tillage. So
Yes.
how do you amend your soil without tilling? I mean, is there such a thing?
There's really no way around it. I mean, if you're doing your lawn, you can do that core aeration, and that's just pulling up little bits rather than tilling up the whole thing. But if you're building a planting bed, like foundation planting, or maybe you're building a mound, wherever, a flower bed in the middle of the yard, you're gonna have to do some tillage. And then, once you break it up and you get it manageable, then you stay out of it with the tiller. Because I used to tell my ex-husband, I said, the only time I need you is to go out there with the big tiller, hit it once, you're out. Don't go into the garden no more, because then I can take my mantis and I can go up and down the rows and I can do what I want to do, So the big tiller would only hit it once. And then, like I said, he's out of there. What's your question? Tillage, I'm sorry. Yeah, just how do you stay away from tillage? Because the book, seems to go less tillage. We want to go no till, right? Like if you look at the large farmers, they'll do, they will use special seeders, and they'll go in, like after you take the corn out, they'll put the wheat in for the winter, and they'll leave the corn, the debris, most of it in the field, and they'll just plant within it. And same thing when you cut the wheat, then you plant the soybeans afterwards. And so you're staying away from deep tillage on your soil, because that breaks down the soil particles and everything. All right. I didn't pull any soil samples, but I was going to ask you, what do you think are some challenges with soil reports in urban areas? Some of the things that you might find in an urban area. Just kind of pick your brains a little bit. Pollution, a lot of rocks. Yes, some drastic changes.
You're always mixing, dirt from one site to another.
Right, mixing soil from one site to another, the sizes, the blockage, and we talked about those little blocks. They're all different sizes and things. So.
Like pest control companies, pest chemicals.
Okay, toxic chemicals. Okay, you'll see that more in an urban environment.
My parents first bought our house.
Mhm.
Our house now. It had been farmland,
Yes.
but we lived a little bit on a hill.
Mhm.
So they decided they were gonna make it a basement house. So they dug down and all of that came out.
Yeah.
Part of it ended on top.
Yeah, you turn it over when they go
And-
through the building process. That is true.
And then leveled it off,
Mhm.
scraped it.
Yeah. They brought the bad stuff up to the surface and put the good stuff down on the bottom. That's what you see in development. So.
It's got rocks. Well, I didn't get paid a penny a rock. I didn't pay anything. Just go pick it.
Just go pick 'em. All right. So some of the things that I found in just doing a little bit of research, in most urban areas, the soil information is incomplete. I mean, when I was in school, we didn't have like the USDA web soil survey that's online now, where you can just put your address in and then you find your address. It's a neat tool. You have to learn how to use it. It takes some practice. USDA web soil survey. Okay, just go online, Google it, and read through the directions, and then go through and just put your property address in, and you have to make a little square over your property, and then click another little button, and then it'll tell you your soil profile. Eventually you'll get to where it tells you your soil profiles, which tells you whether you've got like a Baxter Turvey loam, whether you've got a Guthrie soil, the different types of soil. Now, like I said, when I learned how to do this, we had a book, and I probably should have brought it up here, where all these soils, it was in a map on a book, and it was just, like in waves almost is what it looked like. And so you had to find your page number, you had to find the exact spot where your property was. There really was no houses no roads to show you where exactly you were looking for it. So it could be very difficult to use one of those soil profile books to find information about the parent conditions of your soil. Well, now, like I said, you can go into USDA web soil survey. You can find information about drainage. You can find out if it's listed as prime farmland or not prime farmland. It will tell you if you've got cherty soil. It will tell you what crops would grow best on it and different things like that. So y'all can investigate that if you have time, or contact me sometime through the week and come in and we can go over it if you want me to help look it up on the survey. So, but most of our soil information is out of date because so much building and changing and growing of communities has happened, and so the soil structures have changed, the topsoil has changed. And so our information that we have can be incomplete or outdated. Another thing is phosphorus in watersheds. Okay, once the excess phosphorus gets into a watershed, now everybody knows what a watershed is, right? Okay.
I know, I remember thinking watershed.
No, it's not like a shed. Okay, it's like all this area around the Cumberland River and all its tributaries, like Yellow Creek, and I can't think of the other creeks, but Red River, everything that flows into the Cumberland would be the Cumberland watershed, or the Red River watershed is what it's called here. We have the Cumberland Water Compact. So the watershed is the area, maybe the farm that you live on, where that water passes through and it goes into a larger body of water. Okay, and so there are creeks and streams and things like that. So if you have an area where you have homeowners or you have farmers or whatever, and they're just putting out 10-10-10 on 4 or 5 times a year. I'm just going to take a 50-pound bag of 10-10-10. I'm going to throw it out there on my lawn. Okay, then you get a high phosphorus rating. Where's that phosphorus going to go? Okay, it's going to work its way into the river, or the largest body of water that your watershed empties out into. So phosphorus can be a big problem. And I've noticed over this last year, and I'm not sure why, but our phosphorus levels have been very high on most of the soil tests that come back. Now, that could be that you're not pulling your samples from a deep enough depth, because phosphorus does not move readily in the soil. It sits in that top about 3 inches. And so if you go out there to dig for your soil test and you can't dig more than 3 inches, you're going to pick up some extra phosphorus. Okay, but eventually it can move through the water, and it can cause deficiencies in zinc and iron in the soil, and that they're not, then that phosphorus is not available for the plants. And then as it gets into our rivers, our lakes, then it feeds the algae and other water type weeds. I don't know if you've ever gone to Kentucky Lake sometimes during the middle of summer, and they've got this nasty green grass growing in the swimming area. Anybody experience that? You go out there to go swim and it's like, oh, yuck, what got me? But that is because there's too much phosphorus, or there's too many nutrients being pulled into the lake, and it's causing those weeds to grow. And also the sun is getting to the base
What
too.
about like in our subdivision?
Mhm,
At one time, it would snow, well, we were just out of luck.
mhm.
But now, since the city limits has moved beyond us and we're city, they come out and salt or the chemical.
Yes, that's another thing is, yeah.
I wonder, because roads are built with a peak in the center to run off.
Mhm.
And that means it's running into our yards.
Mhm. Yeah,
And,
yeah, into the stormwater drains and off into the river. Yeah. I mean, I guess, that's something, if you want to be able to get out in the winter, they're going to use salt. There are alternatives, but I'm not the highway department, and I can't tell them what to do, because salt is going to be the cheapest form of keeping ice off the roads. So it's kind of like, trimming your trees near your utility lines. Do you want electricity, or do you want that tree? You want ice on the road, or you want them to use some salt and make it safe for you to travel. So, yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm, mhm. They always used, I mean, in Missouri, but we had, they were prepared for winters there too. They had the plows, they had the equipment, they got more snow than what we get down here. But they would use cinder blocks. They would use the remains from the charcoal plant that was around our house to put on the roads and things like that, in addition to salt. So, like I said, there all are alternatives. Beet juice, but that might make your car purple after you drive through it. But beet juice is supposed to be a really good natural de-icer. I've never tried it because I didn't want to make my car purple. I thought about it one time when my doors were froze shut. I was like, maybe I ought to go get a jar of beets and pour it on there and see what happens.
It seems like our driveway is one that it curves and then goes up
Mhm.
because of the basement. Seems like he took ashes from the wood stove.
Well, yeah.
Because when they would come along with the truck with the scrape on the front of it, it piled up right there. We couldn't get over the hump out of our driveway.
Yeah.
He'd take the ashes out of the wood
Yeah.
stove and go up there and just spread them.
I remember my dad doing things like that. And he used to run a big logging truck, and he would, when he pulled the ashes out of, from the wood stove, he would take that pan of ashes and put under the old diesel so it would warm it up so it would start easier. I don't know if you all heard of that trick. That'd been a long time ago. Yeah. With my dad and my uncles, I remember them doing that. They'd take those ashes, that big pan of ashes. I was glad they did it. I hated to do it. After I got a little bit bigger, I had to do it. It was like, if you were the first one home from school, you took the ashes out and you got wood in the house before Dad got home. But let's go on. Oops. Some other things that we see in the soil. Yeah, my mouse don't want to work. But anyway, when you get this excess of nutrients, you're going to, like I said, have the explosive growth of algae in the ponds. You may have fish kills because of that algae growing. It takes away the oxygen that the fish need in the water. You can see turnover of ponds, and then you get fish kills, things of that nature.
It's one lake.
Yes, they had a huge problem, and that's because nutrients are running off from other areas. So
I think the area can get better.
yeah, I think so. I think they dug it out, and
I thought they should, when they dug it out, or drained it, they should have got out there with a bulldozer and scraped the bottom some.
all right, I'm sorry, my mouse is not working right. I'm trying to get my notes to scroll down. Okay, well, some of the other things that I know that I had listed here that I wanted to mention was the heavy metals. And for those of you that are working with community gardens, and that is something that's growing. And so when you think about creating gardens, where you're producing edible products, make sure that you're getting a heavy metal test before you go planting. Like on all these old industrial sites is where you're going to find the main damage, like the old Vulcan. Oh, I wouldn't plant anything. But they just have a lot of heavy metals in the soils. Those create, and even from our sewage plant, what's going into the rivers, the sludge that is going into the landfill, it's all putting what's considered never ending chemicals. Forever chemicals. They never go away. And so I'm gonna kind of make a public service announcement here is because I think y'all need to know about this. The wastewater treatment plant is about to be expanded, which is a good thing. Okay, and they're getting a thermal dryer to dry the sludge. Okay. The thermal drying process will indeed kill pathogens through composting. Your E. coli, salmonella, just basic disease pathogens. That process of decomposition will not take out those forever chemicals. And what they are planning on doing with it is selling it or giving it to farmers to use as fertilizer on their fields. So being an advocate in your community, it might behoove you to learn more about this and speak to the powers that be about this issue. Because it's actually, yeah. So, yeah, the main, see, this was brought to my attention by farmers in the community. Because, you know, I mean, you think of, oh, free sludge, I got free fertilizer, I'm gonna put it out all over my field. It's got no pathogens in it. It does still have heavy metals and chemicals, those forever chemicals in it, and that can be detrimental to our environment. Just look up issues in Maine with those forever chemicals. It's been outlawed in Maine. And I myself am trying to reach some people and educate them about what could happen if that sludge, those pellets were put all over our farm fields, in our gardens. Because, you know, sometimes you think free fertilizer, you don't think about what else comes with it. And I think no,
Are they testing it at all? Will they be testing it for heavy metal?
I don't know. I've asked for meetings.
Has a friend.
Could it get into the tap water?
Yes.
And
Oh,
so he got the sludge, put it all over his yard. It stunk to high heaven and he got a lot of tomatoes. It was a disaster.
But what did he eat?
Yeah. It's what the other people.
Okay.
When you test the soil testing centers, you check for that.
We can test for heavy metals. But if you want to search for a specific chemical, you would have to use an outside lab. Like if we have issues where, you know, my neighbor sprayed my tree with a pesticide, you know, we can't get in the middle of that. You have to take a test and send it to an outside lab in Memphis. So with something like this, if you wanted your water tested for those forever chemicals, you might have to go to an outside lab and do it yourself. They got big names. I'm not sure what the,
We ran
Poly-
having a big problem with them.
Yeah.
when,
I could send out the article. It was,
wanting to come in here and build, make the, material to make energy out of the sun.
right.
So the solar panels.
Solar panels, okay.
And one of my first cousin, who was brother,
Mhm.
was one of the first that was hired to work there.
Mhm.
And of course, when they didn't do it, the Chinese started doing it cheaper than we could. David said, we dodged a big bullet because all of the chemicals that were going to be coming in here and would not leave from that plant.
Yeah.
You know, it's,
Yeah, these are things I'm just going to encourage you to investigate those forever chemicals and look into the building and expansion of our wastewater treatment plant. And, you know, maybe call your city council, your county commission person and say, hey, you know, what studies have been done to back up this research? And that's what I'm trying to find out too.
things
So,
sludge down in Moore County.
Mm.
But it's sludge from Jack Daniels.
Well, yeah, there's a difference there. Yeah, there's a difference between what comes out of the human body and,
You can tell who's
Yeah.
got sludge from there when going down the road.
yeah. Okay, sorry.
What about Milorganite? Does that fall into the same category as?
That does fall.
And would there be forever chemicals?
You would have to have it tested to see.
Even though it comes from a brand name merchandiser? Yeah.
You would still have to have it tested. Hmm.
Would you avoid using it?
I would now. I would now. Yeah,
They.
because I probably shouldn't say too much, or I'm gonna end up getting myself in
I saw
trouble,
the
but
market.
I know when I worked for the highway department back in Missouri in Springfield, we used the sludge and the gray water on the landscape beds. You know, so I already know that for a year I was exposed to stuff like that. I don't know that I'm gonna have health problems from it. Who knows? But we were using it on non-edible, just the landscapes, the little, the beds and the, between the road, the highway and stuff like that. But I know I hated using that stuff because we would put it in as an amendment. And then when we go to Branson and we'd water the flowers down there, we'd have to go to the wastewater treatment plant and fill up with that gray water. And we would be watering the plants with it and waving at the people as they went by with the ducks, So there's a lot of issues out there. That's my soapbox. I'll get off of
The last week or so, I read somewhere,
it.
I didn't read it all, but it was talking about human composting.
Mhm,
That in some places,
mhm.
and I questioned that because the human body now is considered hazardous waste. Because we have so much X-ray and other exposure.
Well, there's hormones, there's drugs, there's
Yeah.
fentanyl, there's meth, there's so many other things that are passing through bodies, medications and things like that, that they're finding in our water system, that there's got to be a way to clean it. And the charcoal cleaning process is, about all I know that will take care of that or remove it down to acceptable levels. And that's what they're going to tell you, that it's going to be an acceptable level,
That's why
just
a
like the
lot of our
atrazine in my
cemeteries
water.
Require a vault
Yeah.
for the coffin to go in.
Yeah.
Is so that when it starts breaking down, it's not going out into the house.
Yep, a lot going on, but I better move on or we'll be here all night. Like I said, I'll get off my soapbox about that, but no, nothing's truly organic anymore. There's really no way that it could be. Okay, some ways that you can improve your soil, things that you can do on your own site is use those cover crops and green manures. And I will put up some publications that will talk about cool season cover crops, which you would want to put out now. August or October 15th is about your latest date to put out a cover crop, which would be something like wheat, red crimson clover, oats, rye, a mix of that sort. So if you're planning on putting a cover crop, you need to get it out pretty soon. You do fertilize for a cover crop if it's needed because you want a healthy cover crop. And then that is going to be tilled or rolled down and you're going to use it in your garden and plant the next year. So manure. Manure is another thing that you've got to be careful about also. Manure and hay or straw that you're using in your gardens. There's several chemicals and I had them listed on that slide, but I couldn't get down to my notes. But Grazon has been one of the worst. It's just a herbicide used by farmers. It's used some even by landscapers. Certain formulations are used by landscapers on your lawn, but that can kill your vegetable plants. Okay, you put a little bit in there, you use the manure, or maybe put the straw around as a mulch, and it's still got those chemicals in there because it does not break down as it goes through the cow system or the ruminant system, or even the composting process. The heavy metals and the chemicals do not break down. So what was that?
So it's forever.
Another forever chemicals, yes. So compost, I guess just be aware of where you're getting it. Ask if it's been tested for heavy metals, forever chemicals. Your soil conditioners, same thing. If you have areas, you're doing large farming, and you do have a hard pan, a natural hard pan, you may end up having to use ditches or tiles, and that helps with the drainage of the fields. And then look at erosion and tillage and how you're going to manage those two things. So cover crops are grasses, and this is what I was talking about. You could plant right now, but you do want a legume. You want some type of a bean in there, and you also want some type of a root crop like a turnip or a daikon radish in with the mix, so that it will grow down and kind of break up that hard clay soil over time. So they're usually pretty easy to establish. You get a high biomass, which means in spring you're going to have a lot of residue, but you're also making your own straw, okay? Or you're making your own mulch. So you can mow this cover crop down and just kind of rake it off to the side and let it start composting, and then use it in between your plants, in between your rows. What a lot of the large farmers do is they have a machine that actually rolls over it to, it's not a pressure. And it rolls over the crop and lays it down. And then you do strip tillage in between. You plant your economical crop or your vegetables, whatever, in between, and you just roll down this cover crop and let it lay there. And the microorganisms are still working on the soil, and it just starts to decay naturally. And you know that you've got your own mulch there, you've grown it, you know what chemicals are on it, it's there. So what I used to do in small areas is take a 55-gallon drum, fill it up with water, and I would put my cover crop out. And then when I was ready to garden, I'd take that 55-gallon drum and just roll it along and roll that cover crop down, and then till or just hand remove in the middle. Yes, it sounds like a lot of work, but after a couple of years, I already had a couple of inches of soil built up on what started out to be really, really poor soil. I'll have to get those pictures out one of these times at the farm that I did have. So yes. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yes, you could. Mhm. Yeah. So in raised beds, it's a little tougher. I've tried to do that over at our Kleeman garden. Buckwheat does really good because it comes up fast and then it goes to seed, and we just pull the seeds off and let them fall and just kind of hand work it back down into the beds. And so that adds some natural phosphorus to your soil, and it adds to that soil structure. When you get into the oats and the wheat, it's a little bit tougher to get that stuff to lay down and stay laid down, but you can cut it and let it break down naturally or incorporate it into the soil. So like I said, I will put up some specifics on cover cropping on that Google Drive that will give you better information. But this would be one mix would be your grasses. And then of course you have the legumes. The legumes help to fix nitrogen. And as high as fertilizers are right now, you want a little, use the natural fertilizer as much as you can. So crimson clover, your vetch, different things like that, that will help to fix that nitrogen in the soil, the field peas. A lot of times you have to order them online. I mean, you can get the basics at Co-op or Tractor Supply. The box stores generally do not carry these mixes, but I have just Googled and bought them online. Baker Creek, Baker Creek Heirloom Seed has some good mixes available. I've gone to Gurney's. Gurney's has these cool season and warm season mixes. So I've ended up had to order them online. Co-op has thrown some together for me, but they don't always have everything that I want. So I just order it online and it makes it easier. So, but all of this is going to help to suppress those weeds. If you put out mustards and then you till that under, The mustards have that, well, mustard gas. I think we talked about that one night. But the mustards, as you till them under, they have to be tilled in. They act as a pre-emergent type herbicide, a natural pre-emergence. It keeps weed seeds from germinating. It'll keep all seeds from germinating, not just your weeds, plant your desired plants too. So you have to give it a certain amount of time to work and then plant. But that's a good natural way to get weeds under control and get control of that seed bank. So, but again, like I said, a lot of biomass will be produced when you do this. So you've got to be prepared in the spring to rake it, crimp it, roll it down, and do something with it. I mean, mine was just roll it down and plant in between, and it worked really well.
You get them on Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon, Google, yeah. So, okay, other cover crops. These would be your spring cover crops. Buckwheat. As I said, I love buckwheat. There's a red buckwheat and a pink and a white. I actually tried to establish, because I wanted red, pink, and white in my lawn at my little house, and the red didn't come up as well as the white, and the white kind of took over. So we'll try again next year, maybe keep them a little bit further away now that I've got more space. But it does make a pretty cover crop where you don't have grass or where grass won't grow. Just put that in with your vegetable gardens. You can eat seeds, you can eat the flowers. They're kind of tasty, just like eating a little nut. You can put it in your salads and stuff like that. If you have enough of it, you can grind it up and mill flour, but you'd have to have quite a bit. But just, you could just grab a handful, throw it in your salad and eat it. So, but it also helps bring in your pollinators. All kinds of pollinators love buckwheat, and it flowers all through the summer season. So another category is our brassicas, which is our mustards or our radish. We talked a little bit about that. The mustards, once incorporated, can be kind of a pre-emergent. The radish, like your daikon radish, just helps to break up that clay soil and just kind of make a happy place for the roots to grow, and then it dies off and it's got organic matter down there. So you can use carrots. I mean, you do plant carrots in the fall. Okay, so if you want to grow carrots, you need to be planting them now. And yes, you need to be planting them now, and make sure that you've got, a pretty deep bed dug for them, or you're using a raised bed. There's varieties of really short carrots, but I mean, if you want long carrots, you can do that in a raised bed. It can act as a cover crop.
It doesn't grow well alongside of a wheat or an oat or something.
Yeah. Yep.
Doing something like that with carrots, would you put a cover crop like the buckwheat, the mix over top of that too?
I wouldn't do buckwheat at this time of year.
Okay.
I mean, with your carrots, you might want to keep that in a separate area, but I have mixed them. So it would be up to you. If you're using it as a cover crop, what I did is I harvested what I could, and the rest I just let decay, because I ended up with so many carrots that I didn't know what to do with them all. So that's what happens when you get grandkids out there and they get your seed packets and they're behind your back doing like this, and then all of a sudden you got carrots everywhere. So, but it's worked out good.
Bunch of carrot cake.
No, we cooked them and ate them right there, pulled them out of the ground. I had one that was just pulling them out of the ground, and she'd wipe them off, eat them. No. So the other benefits of cover crops is increasing that organic matter. It increases your biological communities in the ground, those microorganisms and such. It does add some nutrients, but it's really making the soil to where the plant is better able to take up those nutrients, increases your water holding capacity. So it's not just for vegetable gardens, think site preparation. When I built my house, the farm that I had, the first 2 years was spent planting annual crops where I was going to plant the foundation plantings. And that was to build up the soil. I was adding compost, I was planting carrots, I was planting turnips, all those things, and just mainly turning them under, lettuces, anything that I had seeds for, depending on the season. And then finally started putting in the landscape plants that I wanted, the trees and shrubs that I wanted in there. So, and that would, I had that about 5 years. And then. So are there drawbacks? Yes, it could be a lot of work. Okay, it just depends on how much work you want to put into it. The timing, like I said, right now it's already, we're into October. Where does the time go? And so you have to be prepared ahead of time, be thinking about going ahead and pulling those tomatoes out, even though they're still producing and they look all raggedy. They may have a red tomato on them. You may have to just go ahead and take them out so that you can get your cover crops out. In the spring, same thing. Think about it early on. You want to be getting out there in the garden as soon as possible before those spring rains start, get things planted. So timing is critical. The equipment, if you're doing cover crops on a large scale, like I said, the crimpers can cost a lot, but you can use, like I said, a 55-gallon drum. You can use a log. You can use whatever you've got around the house that you can roll to roll down that cover crop. And then, yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering, just, you said carrots are okay now, what else can you plant now?
Your carrots, your radishes, your lettuce, collards, garlic. Yes, definitely garlic. Be putting out your daffodil bulbs, your spring blooming bulbs. But anything that you would think of as a cool season crop that you would put out early spring, you could put out now, and it should do well. Sweet peas, you might do okay with sweet peas. Yeah, normally you would want to get them out about the middle to the end of September, definitely before October 15th. So we're kind of right there on that line. It depends on what Mother Nature decides to do this year. I don't think we had a good freeze until November of last year. But then I can remember 10 years ago having a hard freeze on the first week of October. So it's just, climate is changing, and it seems like our freezes are coming later in the fall, and then it's staying colder into the spring. So that's kind of changing.
Temperature's been nice.
Yeah, the temperatures have been nice these last few weeks. So and we talked about manures. Good source of organic matter. If you're using chicken manure, remember that chicken manure is very high in urea, in nitrogen. So be careful about that. Chicken manure is definitely something that I would put on in the fall and let it decompose over the winter. And that way you've got it incorporated. Well, any of your manures, if you look at the organic standards, they want your manures to be composted 90 days to 120 days before planting, especially if you're planting greens. And so when you get into, big agriculture, there's a lot of rules now around growing leafy greens and things like that, good agriculture practices and having audits on your farm and all this stuff and rules that you've got to follow. So food safety is important. So keep that in mind when you're using those manure type products. If you're composting yourself, you may want to get a thermometer to make sure you can put that into your pile and make sure that it's getting hot enough. Usually the recommendation is it needs to stay at 130 degrees for like 4 weeks, and you need to turn it. You need to keep turning it and turning it. The more you turn it, the faster it will break down. The higher the temperature is outdoors, the faster it's going to break down. But that is just simple composting. Okay. Let's see, the composition, the manures could have a lot of salts in them, and that can go back to the fertilizers and the herbicides that were used on the fields. And then your nutrients can be immobilized because of a lot of straw. You get your greens and your browns out of whack in your compost pile, and it just sits there. If you have a lot of straw or a lot of grass clippings and it's just not doing anything, you need to add something fresh to it and increase those microorganisms, and then that makes that start breaking down. So it's kind of like starches. Starches don't. Well, it depends. I mean, if they're fresh, yeah. If they're fresh, they would be, yeah.
Adding something like black crowd.
Yeah. That's the same thing. That's just a compost. It's humus. Yeah. You can buy your manure, your compost in bags. things like that, or you could get it fresh. I mean, a lot of the farmers will give away horse manure, cow manure. You'd probably have to go out and pick it up yourself.
Just let it dry.
There's a lot of dry cow patties. Yeah. Yes.
Would it be ideal if you're wanting to do your cover crops in the fall to put animal manure? Even if it's not.
Yeah, I would incorporate it, till it in first and then put your seed on top. Because if you put it directly in that fresh compost, it can burn up the seeds once they start to germinate. So,
But the cover crop will still be fine
Mhm.
by the time you're ready to grow it.
yes,
In the summer, you're good.
Yeah. you just may have a little delay on germination. Okay, the compost, again, the composition, it depends on the sufficient temperatures, how often you're turning, does need oxygen, does need water. If you've got a compost bin and it's smelly, you need to either add more greens or add more browns to balance that out, because you don't want a wet, soggy compost pile. Okay, so you're constantly adding things. Like I keep a thing under my kitchen sink that I put scraps in, just regular food scraps, no bones, no meat, no fat. I do use eggs. Now, some people will say don't use eggshells, but I do put eggshells in mine. I just crunch them up. Well, I don't know. It adds calcium. Some people say it attracts animals, like the meat and the fat would, but I crunch them up. You just wash them. Yeah, you can rinse them out and then I just crumble them up and put them in. Yeah.
Got a mortar and pestle that I
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
gave to my mom years ago because she couldn't pick me downstairs and she's hammered. So I bought him a mortar and pestle from here at Christmas. Now it's
Okay.
mine.
So, but yeah, we've talked about the chemicals. Just be aware of those potentials for herbicides. If somebody's giving you free manure, free straw, hay, ask what's been used on their fields for weed control before you put that into a garden area. Some other soil conditioners that can be used. All right, peat moss, okay, is basically just dense, decayed sphagnum moss. We usually get that from up north where the temperatures are cooler and the composting process is slower. So we add compost to our soil, it breaks down very quickly because it's hotter here. So usually our peat moss and such like that comes from Michigan and up, northern states where it stays a little cooler. Perlite is made from volcanic rock, and it's mainly used in your potting soil mixes. The perlite will be the little white things that look like little pieces of styrofoam, but it's not styrofoam. It is volcanic rock that is heated and crushed, and it's put in with that peat moss. And then you have vermiculite, which is that kind of gold looking stuff that's in your potting mix. And so it is basically it is a magnesium sulfate. And so it can add some nutrients to your soil. Sand, you don't want to use sand on clay because you put sand and clay together and it makes rocks or bricks rather. If you have larger, more coarse sand, it might be okay to add some with it, but I would still think that the compost, the organic matter, is going to work better than putting sand into our clay soils, unless you are making bricks or clay pottery or something like that. So,
Gracie Cove outside Crossville, which the soil is sandy, and he dug a fire pond next to their house.
Okay.
But he wouldn't haul water. And I suggested to his wife, I said, you need to go back up where I'm from and get a pickup truck load of red clay and put that in the bottom of the fire pond.
yeah.
And then your pond will hold in.
And a lot of times people will put hogs in farm ponds that are leaking. Leave a hog in there and let them waller for a while, and that will seal it up too. Put a hog and some kaolinite clay in there, and that usually fixes the problem. So, and we hope that the addition of these products will help in the long run. So, here's just some real world problems. I mean, some fields are going to have low spots. I mean, you see this all over. This is where the farmer would probably need to come in with some type of tile system, some type of drainage system below the ground that's going to pull that water away. If you're looking at this in your backyard, I would be calling the street department probably to find out why you got all this water in your backyard. But there are French drains, things like that that you can do to divert the water away. It's probably, just natural wet areas. Yes, ma'am.
What exactly does it mean, the tile? What are those tiles?
They are just, it's a drainage system tile that breaks up the soil. Basically, they pull up part of the soil and they put these tiles down that help to direct the moisture away from, and it helps it to drain better.
We had that same problem in our front yard. We took subsoil. to it.
Yeah, the subsoiler
Yeah,
and ripped it.
Goes about 18 inches deep. No more problems.
Yeah.
What are they made out of?
Some can be ceramic, just like tiles.
So they basically put them in the dirt.
Yeah, they'll dig
and then
down.
create a channel.
Yeah, it creates a channel for the water to run away. Another way is to create a grassed waterway. So they might dig a ditch across, this portion of the field and just plant it in grasses. And so that the water has a place to drain and go across the field and it's not washing out the whole area. So you've probably seen that with the ditches in the fields and such like that. Those are ways to get around the drainage issues. Okay. Let's see. Now this site, it's talking about a low-lying area. I don't know, these tomatoes look pretty good to me. This looks
Yeah,
like
but
the end
to
of the
the left.
season.
To the left,
Yes.
see where it's wet?
Okay, so I think I would just avoid planting my garden in that wet area and maybe just plant trees and plants that like to have wet feet that could withstand that environment. So you've got to think about that when you're doing your overall landscape design, identify those areas first and deal with them as necessary. Here's some of your clay drainage tiles. Okay, so this is a very old picture there, but basically they just rip an area out of the soil and they're putting those tiles down in there. Those tiles are hollow. And so the water drains, hits that tile and goes off away from the field. Yeah, it's kind of a pipe system. So,
Another alternative is to use perf pipe. That
Perf
black
pipe.
Pipe and it's got
the little, yeah,
thousands of little slits in it. that
yes.
captures the water and drains it.
Yep. So basically with your tiles and drainage ditches, it's just there to drain that surface water. The water from the saturated soil flows into them and then flows away off to your creeks and on into the river, prevents erosion, used to lower a high water table. I went on a visit. Yeah, it was earlier this week. No, last Friday. But they told me that even at this time of the year, when they went to build their fencing and they dug down about 18 inches, they were hitting water. And so they have a very high water table. And Woodlawn, closer to Woodlawn off Dover Road. I was really surprised. And then as we walked into the woods, because what they were wanting to do was to increase their pasture areas, but save some trees. It just kept getting swampier and swampier. There wasn't a creek really around, but she said that when they took the post hole digger and they dug those holes, they ran into water standing there. So I was like, wow. So they were, of course, looking into building a well, having a well built for, to water their plants and animals and stuff like that. Erosion is basically just soil loss. It can be caused by wind, sandy areas. You're going to see a lot of the sand blown away. Erosion can be caused by wind, water. It's just a detachment of the soil particle from the ground and it runs off. And so we remember the years of the Dust Bowl. Before these practices were put into place, farmers were just growing crop after crop after crop, and they didn't really know any better. They didn't realize that their soil was blowing away, it was washing away, and eventually it all ends up in the Mississippi and it ends up down the ocean, you know.
The Florida
So-
beaches, when the
Mhm,
surge comes in, when it goes out,
mhm,
it takes most of the beaches with it.
mhm.
That's why they had to outlaw people. Used to, they wanted to pick all the sea oats. to
Oh,
use.
okay, yes.
And now, if there's sea oats anywhere on a beach, Florida, you cannot touch those sea oats.
Yeah, okay.
That's what's keeping that beach.
Yeah, it's keeping the beach there. Yeah, yeah. So we don't want to do silly things like build on the beach or build our house on a cliff and stuff like that. Going down River Road really scares me. Seeing some of those houses they're building, they're hanging right. Woo. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Because I can just, you can see parts of the road are starting to decay anyway. So,
I know, the roads are very skinny here, by the way.
yes. And I'm wondering in the future, I'm like, how in the world are they going to fix River Road when they do get to it? How in the world do you fix something like that? I mean, eminent domain. Yeah.
They have to give you value for it.
Right.
They can take all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, they can take whatever property they want from you. They're eminent domain.
When you come across the other bridge further down,
Mhm.
you can see these houses built on the cliffs down through the river.
Yeah.
They've got the big decks on the back. They always built a building. It's like, oh, they're gonna sit on the back porch and fish.
Yeah. Okay, we'll keep moving on. I think we're getting close to being done here. So, of course, preventing erosion, we've talked about that. You want to keep your soil covered, have some type of plant material out there all the time. The sunlight is hitting the soil surface, then you're going to have weeds. You're just protecting them from that detachment and runoff. Use mulches, use plants for cover, reduce your slope if you can. While you're building, you have some control over this. When you're building your house, work with your developer when they're making the slopes. That's one thing that we ran into. I didn't realize after we had built a house how steep the slopes were going to be left. And that's why I was left with some areas that were just awful. And but anyway, these are things that you can look at if you ever build a new house, keep in mind. Tilling. To till or not to till is one of the biggest questions. Like I said, a little bit of tillage is going to be needed to start a new garden bed or a planting area. But then once you get that tilled and you get those weeds, grass removed, try to stay out of it with the tiller as much as possible. Maybe hit it once a year, maybe twice a year, but you can always lightly till and not deep till, go down 12 inches or something. Maybe just hit the soil surface, get rid of the weeds that are there, but not do a lot of deep tillage because you're breaking up that soil structure and you're bringing up more weed seeds. So your tillage practices, some of the benefits would be that incorporating that organic matter, it does control weeds. Aeration and compaction, I kind of have an argument there because it can create some compaction over time. So increased warming because you're breaking up that soil, it warms up faster. You have a fine seed bed that's level, everything quickens the organic matter breakdown, but it does bring up those weed seeds, it breaks up the soil aggregates, and it reduces those large pores or channels that you want to keep in the soil. So it all goes back to soil structure. So you want a lower bulk density, a lower weight, more pore space for that water to work its way through, to slow down, go down into the soil. When we have a higher bulk density, we have higher weight, we have less pore space, then you're going to see more runoff in that type of soil, because it's not going to sink in. It has nowhere to go. Okay, we've talked a lot about the soil sampling. I don't need to go over that again. Okay, just keep in mind a well-representative sample, your sample or your results you get back from the lab are only as good as the representative sample that you send into the lab. So, our soil test. No, 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 no. Soil sample needs to be dry. Now, I know right now you can't even dig in the ground to get a soil sample. So I've had several people I've talked to the phone, I've talked on the phone with, and they're like, I give up. I can't even dig, and we've got a soil probe that we lease it out. You put down a $25 check and you can take the soil probe home with you, and it's got a little thing on it where you can use your foot to shove it down in the ground, and then the little clod of dirt sticks in the center of it, and you gotta beat it out with a stick.
I got a soil probe.
It's real fun. So,
I got a soil probe, trying to do my yard and like lost the tip.
yep. It's kind of like using a tulip planter in Tennessee. Have you ever tried to use one of those little tulip planters? It works better for planting annual plants. Yeah, I use it for planting my annuals in a good seed bed. It pulls up that little hole, but for planting bulbs, no way. So when you get your soil test results back, what does that mean? Okay, so we talk about a water pH, and that's an estimate of the pH solution around the soil particles. It's going to give you the levels of nutrients in that soil sample, and then it's going to tell you what to do to add to your soil to reach that correct range for the plant that you want to grow. So if you have a home soil test, yes, it's going to tell you your pH. It's going to tell you what your levels are, but it's not going to give you a recommendation based on the plant that you're wanting to grow, how much nutrients, how much lime, or how much sulfur that you're going to need. So the home tests are not as accurate. I mean, I know there's a cost to this. We charge $25 now. The lab charges $15. We have to charge $10 to ship it up. It's 2 cups worth of soil. So it costs that much to send it off. So, but I think it is a good investment, and I like using our lab because I can decipher the soil results and the recommendations. So yes.
I know you said to take all these samples from around like the whole area, but like all these trees, and then the front is like spongy, I don't know that's that.
Mhm.
The way in the back, it's got moss.
Yeah.
So,
If you have really different areas, like your front yard is totally different looking than your backyard, then you would probably want to send that in as 2 samples. Gather your subsamples from just the front lawn and label it front, and then do your back lawn, do a separate soil test for that back lawn or whatever. So
Just like last week, you were talking about orchard trees that you go deeper for your soil test.
Mhm.
So would you do an
Yes.
orchard area separate from the rest of your lawn?
I would. If you're going to invest in several orchard trees, yes, I would do that separate, because you're digging it down at an 8-inch depth, and you're also digging at a 14-inch depth. So
Would you want separate soil tests? Like I have a raised garden bed, a raised bed garden,
Mhm.
and I have imported soil from different sites
Mhm.
to fill those beds.
Mhm. Okay, is it like soil from the ground, or is it potting soil?
Soil from the ground.
Soil from the ground. Okay.
I have
Yes.
actually collected it from sites that used to be farmed
Mhm.
and are now
Okay.
subdivided.
Yes, you would still, you would gather a few samples from each of your beds and, bring 2 cups worth in and send that off. Now, if you have raised beds and you have no real soil in it, you've used all potting mix, a soilless potting mix, then there's a different test. It's called a media test. And they will tell you what nutrients are in there. So if you've amended with more compost, or use straight compost or straight potting mix, and you want to find out what the nutrient values are, then that's a media test. And that would be $35, if I remember right.
So if I've got a mixture of soil and garden mix.
I would probably just do a regular soil test, because they're all mixed up and you've got more soil in there. So the media test is just for the soilless media, like your bagged potting mix. Yeah.
bagged topsoil.
Yeah, or bagged soil that says soil, but it says like garden soil.
If it's,
True dirt.
if it looks like true dirt or soil, then it would be soil.
Okay.
If it looks like potting soil, then it's probably a soil, a media. It's probably a soilless media.
Doesn't look like Tennessee soil.
No, no, yeah. And so, okay. So let's see, we talked about the pH. This would be more on a commercial level. If you need a lot of lime on your soil, we usually recommend that you break up the applications. You do one application in the spring, one application in the fall. And like if you have a soil, comes back 5.5 and you're needing to raise it up to 6.5, that's going to take a couple different applications of lime to bring that down to where you want it. So you have to give time for either the lime or the sulfur to work in the soil and make those chemical reactions and chemical changes in the soil. Basically, this is another one on reading your soil test, what it's going to tell you. Okay, this is this is a vegetable garden. And so it's going to tell you that it's going to, lime is not recommended at this time. So if you're looking for a recommendation on lime, it's just not there. But it's going to say broadcast 25 pounds of 6-12-12 per 1,000 square foot before planting. And then it will go into details. Like the side dressing of 1 to 1.5 pounds of ammonium nitrate per 100-foot row for these specific crops. So this is what I like about our soil test results is, it tells you exactly what you need to put and how much and where. And it generally gives you an alternative. Like if you don't want to use nitrogen, you can use blood meal. Same thing. Blood meal is organic. It'd take a little bit more, but that recommendation can be there too. So, why weed and feed products are a big no-no. Okay, I hate weed and feed products. It's the lure of convenience. Okay, it's effective marketing that has made these products seem like they're the cure-all, the end-all cure-all. But what you're doing is you may be adding nutrients that you don't need, and you may be trying to control weeds that you don't have. Okay, so when you put a weed and feed product in all together, you can get uneven, excessive applications of those herbicides. Granular weed and feed chemicals, if they're not used up, they can harm the environment. The phenoxy weed and feed, well, a lot of these are linked to two different cancers when you're exposing yourself on a regular basis to them. So that's another thing about being careful with it. You don't want to use it just, as a regular cure. That's why we recommend separate weed control, separate fertilizer. So, and then and your long-term lawn health will be compromised from using these products because you don't know exactly how much fertilizer you are putting down on your ground. You don't know how much phosphorus is already in the soil, and then you're just adding more on top of that. So weed and feeds are not good. Fertilizer labels, they have to go by the law. The percentage contained nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium is a complete fertilizer. And then, of course, we have our chemical fertilizers that are mined and they go through an industrial process where they're mined, mixed, blended, or purified. They do have salts. Salts help to break down that potassium nitrate. And the potassium nitrate is actually what is available to plants. So we just think of potassium, we think K, but if you go through it chemically, it's KNO3, potassium nitrate, and that is what the plant uptakes. So the organic chemicals, basically organic means made of previously living things. So your mulch or your compost, comes from food products. Your blood meal comes from blood. Your bone meal comes from bones of animals and things like that. So they do use those types of things to make those fertilizers. So if it's truly organic, it will have the USDA certified organic label on it. Then the speed and the uptake may vary, but just organic matter is good. Okay. The sorry. So we have formulations of fertilizers. We have granular, and they're usually blended. They're usually pelletized, and those are longer lasting because it takes the coating a while to break down. Depends on how much you water, how much you're irrigating, as to how long those will last in the soil. What's that? An inch a week. Okay. So again, read the label. It may say, if you're watering weekly, this you'll need to reapply in 60 days or 30 days. Just read your label, see what it says. Water soluble would be like a Miracle Grow type product where you mix with water. Again, liquid fertilizers would be the ones when I think of this, I think of the non-concentrated, just the liquids that are already mixed up for you that you put on. And then slow release, like the Osmocote, the pelleted ones that take time to break down. And I hate math. Who else hates math? Okay. All right. But if a bag of fertilizer says 10% nitrogen, that doesn't mean that it has 10 pounds of nitrogen in it. Okay. That's a real confusion that people think 10, 10, 10 means that you're putting 10 pounds of nitrogen, 10 pounds of phosphorus, 10 pounds of potassium, but you're not. You're putting a percentage down. So if your soil test has to apply 2 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square foot, and you have 3,000 square foot garden and are using a 10, 10, 10, how much fertilizer should be applied?
10 times that. 2 pounds or 20 pounds.
It depends on how many pounds. of fertilizer.
20
If you
pounds
have
per
50
square,
pound
1,000
bag of
square feet, so
fertilizer,
60,
10% of it
60 pounds.
is nitrogen.
You got it. 60 pounds. So that fertilizer contains 0.1 or a tenth nitrogen per pound of product, and that's applied to 1,000 square foot area. Divide 2 pounds by 0.1, that's going to equal 20 pounds of fertilizer required to give that 2 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So if you had 3,000 square foot, you just multiply that by 3, 60 pounds is going to be your overall. She was good. It should be in here. Otherwise, this presentation will be put up on the Google Drive, and you can go back to it. I put the recordings and the presentation up on the drive in case you don't want to listen to it again. You can just read through it. Okay, so incorporating fertilizers, we can broadcast. That just means that you're broadcasting it. Fertilizer is spread evenly across the area and then generally lightly tilled in. You can do banding, and this is when fertilizer is placed 2 to 4 inches to young plants, but it's not touching. Sometimes you just dig a trench. So banding, side dressing, the fertilizer is just generally placed alongside the plant. You dig a little trench and put your fertilizer in there. And then, of course, water it in because our fertilizers are salts. And so when you add fertilizer, you've got to remember that it's going to need water. I really am almost done. Are you guys good, or you need a break? You need a break. Okay. No break? No break, yes break? Okay, we'll just keep plugging on. Okay. Just the biological characteristics of soil. Again, we kind of looked at this at the beginning. Our minerals include sand, silt, and clay. These are the small rock particles that are in the soil, and they contain various amounts of nutrients. You will have fungi in there. that have that mycorrhizal connection. Your fungi work with the roots on the plants and help them uptake the sugars and stuff like that. Clay can be kind of a complex organic matter. You got your bacterium, you got your airspace, you got your water, your sand, and your silt. So all soil is made up of those three components. You may have more clay, you may have more sand, or you may have more silt. And if you go on that USDA web soil survey, it's going to tell you the name of the soil. Like I said, like if it's a Baxter silt loam or it's a Baxter clay loam, so on and so forth, it will tell you, you know, like these descriptions. So bacteria acts as our natural decomposers. Decomposers, it's just a bacteria, a fungus, or invertebrate that decomposes the organic material. They're there just to help break down things. Mutualists are a type of symbiotic relationship where the species involved benefit from their interactions, and that would be your mycorrhizal pathogens is an organism that causes a disease on a plant. It could be a fungi, a bacteria, or a virus. And then they have these chemotrophs, and I'm sure I learned about these at one time, but I'd forgotten that it's an organism, typically a bacterium, which derives its energy from the oxidation of inorganic compounds. So lots of connections to nitrogen. We have nitrogen fixing bacteria. We can use plants, but there are natural bacteria in the soil that fix the nitrogen. The rhizosphere, that's just that area around the roots. The bacteria are most plentiful around that root area where they can be attracted to the roots, and the root exudes certain materials, and so those bacteria will cling onto them, kind of like the mycorrhiza. So to support that good bacteria in the soil, fresh organic matter, you know, it's more common, you'll see more bacteria and fungi in a forested situation than you will a common agriculture system where that soil has been tilled over and over and cropped year after year. So, and there is kind of a fungi to bacterial ratio. Fungi is the largest in total biomass. Like I said, woodland environments. They can be decomposers, your mushrooms, things like that. Mutualist, that mycorrhizal fungi that attaches to the roots and helps feed each plant. And then, but some of them can be parasitic and cause damage to the plant. So this is one parasitic fungi. This is a sclerotium. This would be southern blight. And I've never seen such a perfect case. I'm wondering if they painted that white. Because every time I've seen southern blight, it's not been that clear and distinct. I've always had to make a slide or send it into the lab. But you do, when you have southern blight, you'll see the sclerotia. If you can look here, you kind of see those little dots there, the little red dots. That is the sclerotia that spreads. Once you get southern blight into your soil, there is no getting rid of it. You just have to plant plants that are resistant to it, which there's not very many. It kind of puts your field out of production. So if you had it on your tomatoes or your peppers, definitely rotate your crops. You know, legumes and corn are less susceptible to it. But definitely you may have to leave that field fallow, plant some cover crops, and try to get it to clean up that soil, and then just not plant susceptible plants back in that area. It can take years. It can take years because it always exists naturally in the soil. And it's just when you get the bacteria or the fungi and the susceptible host and the right conditions, you're going to have that triangle, that disease triangle. We haven't talked about that yet. But when you have those three things that go together, then you're going to have a disease develop. So, and I did see this year in tomatoes and hemp and peppers. I haven't ever seen it in corn. Soybeans, it can get in soybeans. So even your beans. So, And that's just looking at it under a microscope. Okay. Arthropods are good for our soil. So our centipedes are good decomposers, millipedes. They can be predators of other insects. They can be herbivores, which some of them can be root feeders, like your nematodes. We don't really like those to get on our plants, but there's beneficial nematodes and then there's bad nematodes. And then you've got springtails, which are good because they feed on fungal organisms. So you don't want to kill everything in your soil. That's why I'm just not one to recommend pesticides first thing. You know, I want to try to keep that conservation, keep that ecological balance. And so what's that? Springtail? They're little tiny things. Sometimes you'll see them come up in your sink or your tub for some reason.
They like
Kinda
a
look like a centipede.
No,
They almost look like little tiny flea. Tinier than a flea, but not brown, more gray.
sometimes they're a little bit bigger than that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen them a little bit bigger. But the arthropods, they have their role. You know, they help to shred that organic matter. They mineralize the nutrients. They feed and stimulate the microbes in the soil. They enhance the aggregation of the blocks of soil. They burrow and they control pests. Our earthworms, of course, are good. I almost put an example of one of those jumping worms in here, but the jumping worms, you guys have probably seen them already. Have you seen them in your lawns and gardens yet? Okay, they jump. They wiggle and they jump
Like they jump out of the ground.
on their own. Okay, I'll give you an example. All right, now I'm always one, you know, if I see worms after rain, whatever, out on the sidewalk, I'll pick him up and I'll put him back in the dirt. Okay, I went to pick up this one and he started, I was leaning down, he jumped like that. And I was like, okay, dude, you get to fry because I know what you are now. You are dead.
So are they invasive?
They are very invasive, but I've talked to the Department of Agriculture and it's just one of them things that we have them. If you find them, you're not supposed to use them as bait because, you know, normally you will break up a piece of worm and put it on a hook and you throw it out there. Well, your worm may go flying out into the water and then it grows into another worm and you get more worms and more worms. So they have a distinct band around them. But just look up jumping worms or Asian jumping worms is what they're called. But you'll know. They got them at Austin Peay because we've seen them when we do Plant the Campus Red. Were you there that year we had them green worms that were wiggle? That's what those were. That was some invasive worms.
Now,
And
they're
they-
the same as the one that has like the hammerhead on it.
No, that's a different one. That's another invasive worm. So the problem with those two, the hammerhead and the jumping worms, is they eat our natural worms, our native. They eat, they're carnivores. So they will eat our natural worms and kind of start to take over. So, but they just ask that you don't sell them as bait. You know, you want red wigglers, you know, check your bait before you buy it, make sure they're red wigglers, you know, regular earthworms. There's really nothing you can do. We can't recommend a pesticide because it would kill everything. So it's one of those things, they said they're here.
Birds?
Birds don't even like them because they jump and they wiggle and they probably scare the bird to death. I know that one scared me to death when I went to pick him up and I was like, you die. I just left it out on the sidewalk. I was gonna save it. It was a hot day. I was gonna pick him up and put him back in the, you know, in the dirt in the shade. And I was like, "Mm-mm." So we have basically this complex web of soil biology that's going to support nutrient cycling, nutrient retention, improved water relations, disease suppression, pollutant degradation. So that's kind of a summary of what we've gone over. Supporting diversity into the soil, we want to add organic matter. We want to plant a range of food sources. And that means food sources for us as well as the microorganisms in the soil, bring in those pollinators, bring in those good insects. Consider, think about your tillage and how often you're tilling your gardens. We want to reduce that tillage. Water and air relationships are very important. So think about the compact soil. And we saw that description where you see that little trickle and the rest of the water ran off. We want to reduce that runoff and erosion so that you don't have such compacted soil issues. Okay, organic matter, cover crops, compost, crop residues, tillage, mulches, balanced nutrient management. So that looks like pretty good soil. I'd say somebody's been walking in it though. I see footsteps, and that's one thing really after you get your soil prepared where you want it to be, you're supposed to stay out of it as much as possible. So if it were me, I'd probably have a mulched path somewhere that I would be following, walking on the mulched path or newspaper or cardboard and reaching over and planting. So good stewardship. Your bed preparation, we've talked about mulching, organic matter, your irrigation practices, fertilization tactics, don't over fertilize. If your plants are growing well, you probably don't need the extra fertilizer because if it's not being used by plants, where's it going? Into the water. Okay, and where do we swim and where do we have fun? In that river. In that river. You take your life into your own hands when you go swimming in the Cumberland. I lived here 23 years before I got to the Cumberland. More soil stewardship, site selection, site preparation, the cover cropping, the ripping of the soil, mulches, nutrient management. But your soil stewardship is going to impact your fishing, your recreational activities, because if we get too many nutrients going into the lakes and the rivers, and then you get algae and different types of weeds growing and such like that. And sediment is one of the worst types of pollution that we have, and that's usually coming from a regular tillage practice, field and development, where they're not containing the runoff the way that it should be. And so it's going into our creeks and such. Let's see, you want to use your information from your own site to apply what your soil needs to supply your crops for optimum productivity without a loss to the environment. So improving our soils through organic matter additions will benefit the physical, chemical properties that will have long-term dividends or results. So, okay. Any questions or comments?
Could you speak anything on comfrey?
Comfrey?
Yes.
Comfrey is an excellent herb, and it's called bone set because it can be used medicinally. You do not take it internally. It's toxic. Yeah, it is a topical. You can make a salve from it. It's called bone set because it helps your bones to heal. But it's also a good pain cream, pain salve. It's called Comfrey, COMFREY. You put it on as a poultice or a salve that you rub on your hand. I keep referring to my hand here because I broke all my fingers a couple of years ago. And if it wasn't for the Comfrey poultice that I used, and then I started making the salve, I don't think that I would ever been able to do this again. It just is absorbed through your skin. I'd make a poultice. You can make a poultice out of the leaves and put that directly against your skin, and then just take a cloth wrap. You can study herbs, get you a good herbal book, Rodale's herbs and making different concoctions out of herbs. But it's also very good for the soil. I mean, it adds a lot of nutrients. So if you don't use a comfrey for yourself as a healing herb, you can just till it back into the soil and it adds nutrients. So
Is it a nitrogen fixer?
I don't know that it's a nitrogen fixer. It seems like it would add a lot of nitrogen back in just from the size of the leaves.
Right.
Because my plants usually get huge. I mean, one leaf could be like this big. I mean, where you could literally wrap it around your hand as a poultice.
Right.
So
I've read a lot about making compost teas
Mhm.
and your organic manure
Mhm.
with comfrey. Like
Yes.
the best thing for your garden.
Yes.
from what I've read.
yes, it's good for a lot of different things from what I know. So Comfrey, Comfrey. Yep. Okay, well, next week you should have a different speaker. And I can sit and watch. I can sit and watch. All right. Okay, so I think next week is beekeeping, and we have Charlie Jordan coming in, and he's going to talk about basic beekeeping, and then he said that he had a hands-on activity for us to do. So I look. Hey, bee stings is a form of we call acupuncture.
Yeah, supposedly helps people with arthritis.
It does. That's what I've heard. Mhm.
Would you intentionally, how do
You
you?
intentionally, by its, doesn't it, but doesn't that kill the bee? Yeah, okay, I was gonna say, it has to kill the bee.
Yeah, look it up. It was in the news. It was in like 60 minutes.
Okay, more about the soil structure. Carol, did we cover that good enough? We did? Okay,
It's like it changed from global warming.
all right, thank you all.
Okay.